Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CLI-ALPMA Innovation and Legaltech Week 2021 on-demand program. I'm Terri Mottershead, the Executive Director of the Centre for Legal Innovation at the College of Law, and I'm joined today by the always amazing Ida Abbott, who is the President of Ida Abbott Consulting, based in Oakland, just outside San Francisco. So welcome, Ida. It's fantastic to welcome you back, actually. Hi.
It's a delight to be here, and I thank you for inviting me to do this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to discuss today probably one of the most difficult questions for many lawyers and, of course, their organisations, but it's also one of the most important, and that is planning for retirement. So, Ida, I'm going to kick this off by asking you first, because your consultancy has been amazing in this space of people or talent management for a number of years. What kind of led you to focus on this issue of retirement of lawyers in law firms, and perhaps even more particularly than that, writing your amazing book, Retirement by Design? So what got you into this, I guess, is the shorthand of the question.
Well, it arose out of the other consulting work that I was doing. A few years ago, a number of my clients, both individuals and firms, started asking me questions about what happens next. We focused so much on young lawyers' careers, and then gradually we started looking at partners and how to help partners become more successful. And then just the demographics brought a lot of lawyers into the senior ranks. And while I was thinking senior ranks as, late 60s, 70s, the world was looking at seniors as 50 and up, which put a lot of people there. But in particular, as they were getting older, what was going to happen? One firm told me that they had to go into lease renewal negotiations. And so they needed to know how much space they would need over the next few years. Now, this is pre-COVID, when we were still thinking about office space. And they said they had to, they started looking around at their lawyers and discovered that about a third of their lawyers were over 65. And nobody had ever talked to them about when they were going to retire, if they were ever planning to retire. What happens if all of a sudden everybody announces at once that over the next few months or next year or two, we're leaving? And most firms are not set up to deal with that. Most firms at that point, a few years ago, didn't even know what the age breakdown in their firms were, much less the seniority rankings and that sort of thing. So from a firm standpoint, that became a concern. Like, we need to be prepared if everybody wants to leave quickly, or alternatively, if a lot of people want to stick around and they're not being productive. And how do we have those conversations? So that was from the firm standpoint. And then a lot of individuals were asking me, how do I figure out what I want to do next? I don't want to do this forever. And so I called a group of people together, a few lawyers, one businesswoman, the rest were lawyers, and nobody knew each other. There were about, 6 or 8. And we just had lunch. And as the lunch progressed, they realized they really wanted to talk about this because nobody had any guidance. Nobody knew, other than the books, on how to plan financially for retirement. And there are dozens, hundreds of those. But there wasn't really some guidance for what do you do as your next chapter. So I started facilitating this group. They decided they wanted to keep meeting. I said I would facilitate. I had to learn something about it. I didn't want to just do this blind. I hadn't been thinking about retiring. So I started doing research. And the more I dug into this area, the more I realized that this was an enormous need, and there was no demand for it because nobody knew they could get help. And there weren't enough resources to give them the help they needed.
Yeah.
And a lot of firms, their attitude was, you're a senior partner, you're successful, you're smart, you figure it out. We shouldn't have to help you with this. And so nobody was stepping up to try. And I realized this was an area that needed to be addressed because, as I said, the demographics are just going to drive this. There are too many of us just reaching the point where we want to slow down, we want to quit. Well, we quit practice. We may not want to quit altogether, but some change is going to happen. And so how do we deal with it? So one thing led to another. The more I got into it, and we can talk about the book, separately if you want, because that actually was born out of the materials I put together for that initial group a few years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to pick up one of the threads of many that I'm hoping that we can explore in this session today. But the one particularly that you've kind of alluded to, with people working longer in terms of the age span and that they're working, but also working differently. They're now working flexibly and remotely. And obviously, that broader picture of all of our economies around the world being in turmoil at the moment, which is in and of itself impacting what the workforce looks like or what we need it to look like and how we need people to engage with us in different spots. And so I wonder, out of all of that and somewhat going back to basics, has this whole meaning or concept of retirement changed? Are we also in the process of redefining or evolving a new definition? And what are some of those specific misconceptions, I guess, within that broader kind of perspective about retirement?
Sure. Well, the short answer is yes, it is being completely redefined. The image that most people have of retirement is based on their family, their parents, their friends, maybe grandparents. And other people get most of those images about retirement from the media. So either you have a lot of people doddering around, drooling and being, useless, or they're out on the golf course or partying in hot tubs in senior resorts. So where does the reality lie? The fact is that people are not just living longer today. And, we're talking about 100-year lives now. It's not that everybody's going to live to be 100, but the average age today, or at least pre-COVID, who knows what's going to happen now, but the average age, at least in the US and most Western countries, is close to 80. And most people who reach 60, half of the people who are in their 60s are going to live into their 90s. So our lives are longer, but the more important thing is that we're healthier longer. It's not that we're just adding extra years on. We are adding healthy years. And so people may not have the same level of energy. They may not want to do the same kind of work. They may not want, some people may want to just quit and sit on the back, on the porch and the rocking chair and or play golf, or people used to want to travel. Imagine the number of people who retired last year planning to spend this year traveling. That's kind of heartbreaking. But the fact is that the way it's being redefined it's just a next stage. It's another stage. And there's no reason to think that the old models, the old idea of basically sitting on the porch and waiting to die, which is, kind of the way it used to be, you think about it, and I don't know about what happened in Australia, but Social Security came about in the United States during the Depression. And the average life expectancy at that time was 3 or 4 years younger than the retirement age for Social Security. So most people never even collected Social Security. And at the turn of the 20th century, the average life expectancy was about half of what it is today. So within a century, we've doubled all of that. So, everything has really changed. And people today plan differently. And the other way it's changed is that we used to be very linear. People, you'd go to school, you'd get your training, you'd have your career, you would retire, and that would be the end. And so retirement was seen as the end, as a withdrawal, as, you're no longer useful. You're no longer somebody that the world needs. And to the extent that was ever true, it certainly isn't today. And we see, most new businesses, most successful entrepreneurs are over 60.
Yeah.
Over 50, not 60. Yeah. But people are starting new businesses. And this has been going on for many years. People are quitting one job, taking a different one. They're volunteering, they're creating things, they're pursuing individual, kind of self-actualization experiences that they had never thought they would have time to do. But it is basically a time for you to define, if you pay attention and, you do it by design rather than default. There are so many opportunities to do the things you want to do. And so basically you can define it the way you want.
Yeah, the options and the opportunities, I think, I look at kind of that spectrum of one's legal career, and I think, at the entry level, often those opportunities are not known because they're not being discussed as broadly and widely as they can. But it seems to be equally true at the more experienced level as well, that it's the same issue, but in a different stage of one's career, that they're not being discussed, and which is a shame. And I also think, putting on my legal tech and AI hat for just a second, if someone's energy is decreasing, their intellect is not. So if you're using AI and legal tech to kind of strip out those things that are busy work, and our work is increasingly moving towards being able to focus on that complex problem solving, then I would have thought that kind of like those folks that are at the experienced end, providing they jump in and use the technology, are also actually somewhat in the box seat. Are all of those comments fair, do you think?
Yes, but there's a condition, unfortunately, and that's ageism.
Yes, oh, absolutely, yeah.
And this is sort of the last area of discrimination that is acceptable. A lot of the reason people are reluctant to talk about retirement is that they realize they're getting old, and older. When you think about it, that's the objective, right? Is to get older. And anybody out there, you hope that you're going to live to a ripe old age. And we all expect that we're going to be healthy and active and intellectually engaged and all of that. So we don't realize very often the kind of ageist attitudes that creep into our thinking, that creep into expectations, and certainly into the workplace. And so that there are a lot of people who will look at the person you described, who is intellectually engaged, has a wealth of experience that you can rely on because they've developed judgment over their success, over a successful career. And you can't buy judgment. Yeah. You can't train judgment. That's something that develops the hard way by, over years of doing the work and learning from it. And so you have these people, some people are treasures. And at the same time, because they are perceived as being on the way out. And as I said, I live near Silicon Valley. Around here, that person might be 45.
Mm.
It's the degree of ageism is determined a lot by the particular work culture you're in.
Yeah.
Lawyers have always worked long.
Yeah.
It's not unusual for lawyers. I worked with a lawyer who literally died at his desk. He was probably, 88 or 90. His mind was still sharp and his body gave out. There was no way you were going to pry him away from his work. This was his life. In those days, however, and this was maybe 30 or 40 years ago, people didn't work the way lawyers work today, nonstop, round the clock. And today, there are a lot of lawyers burning out a lot earlier. Some of them really love what they do. They thrive on it. They see it as a mission, a calling. And for them, as long as the clients keep coming and you're productive and the people you're working with, support you, you don't have to stop, unless there's an age limit or some reason that you do, but you can keep going. And there are other people who are burning out just because the demands are too great, and they also realize that there's more to life that they want. So as much as they love the law, they have other interests they want to have time to pursue.
Absolutely, and you make a great point there that that burnout, and we all hope that it's not drastic burnout, but that burnout, whether it's just that you want to pursue other interests, can really happen at any time. We just assume that it's going to happen for somebody because, again, as you say, based on that ageism. But I wonder whether some of the things that you've touched on, and I'm sure there's lots of them, those things, if I can just pull a few out from what you mentioned and underline them. But things like if you start talking about retirement in a candid and honest way in your firm, you automatically stop getting considered for things or stop getting those assignments, or you're automatically almost put into a box, and it's a box that is focused on minimizing your contribution, not maximizing it. And you've spoken about ways that it could be maximized as well. But do you think that has made retirement such a tough topic to discuss in law firms, and for lawyers in particular to have that chat?
It's a huge problem. Part of what I've been on a mission to do for a long time, long before I was even talking about retirement, was having firms consider a lawyer's career as lifelong and recognizing that it's going to change. The needs, the abilities, the focus, everything changes over time as we change. And the problem with one of the problems is exactly as you point out. There is, if there is a culture that sees value only in the hours billed, or the money brought in this year, if that's the only thing you value, then if I announce that I'm planning to leave, even if it's 5 years from now, suddenly I am a lame duck. Suddenly I'm insignificant. The expectations are I'm probably going to slow down, and I'm probably not going to be, the focus. And that's kind of the passive part of it. The more dangerous part is the younger partners or the peers who come in and swoop down and try to take over your clients. And I've seen some of the ugliest behavior I've ever seen in a law firm when somebody announced that they were leaving, and the kind of competition that sparked among other partners for that partner's clients, even before the partner had told the clients. So, so there's that. Another aspect that makes it hard for lawyers, you have so much invested in your client relationships. You've spent your whole lifetime building up this client base and this practice that you are so proud of. And so it's so much a part of your life and your identity and who you are, that the idea of giving it up, even just a little bit, is really, really hard. Mm. And so I've worked with lawyers who felt guilty. They didn't want to do it because they felt guilty leaving their clients in the lurch. They feel betrayal, both on their own part and also on the firm's part because of the way the firm treats them. They are reluctant because they see themselves so indispensable to the client that they can't imagine somebody else doing as good a job, or that the client might start relying on someone else, because they'll never do it as well as I could do it. On the other hand, there's also a fear that what if the client starts relying on the other lawyer? Suddenly I'm the one who's going to be at a loss. So there's so many ways, so much sense of loss that's associated with this. And it doesn't have to be that way. It just, for a lot of people, especially when so much of your identity is tied up with your work, it's very hard to let go. This is not unique to lawyers, but it is really a dominant thread that I see, and I see it with other professionals as well. People who are in professional services and for whom the relationship and the level of success in their own lives is tied so strongly to their practice.
Which brings us great segue to kind of the flip of that, which is about planning for retirement. And I guess, one of the things that you often hear, I've heard it, I'm sure you've heard it even more than me, is that in a way, retirement seems to creep up on a lot of people. They don't plan for it. And that seems, I guess, may even sound a little ridiculous, but you do hear that often, that people just they plan for a whole bunch of things, but they don't actually plan for retirement. So I guess my first question in that is this, which is, why is it important to plan for retirement? And by that, I mean not just leaving work and not just the financial bit that you spoke about before, but almost like planning your next purpose in life, I guess. Why is it important to think about it that way?
Well, first of all, I want to confirm what you said. There was a study a few years ago by a financial services firm, and they were looking at the level of planning for retirement generally, not just about finances. What they found was that most people they surveyed spent more time planning for a 2-week vacation than for their retirement.
Oh, dear.
So you are absolutely right in your observation. Some of that is denial. I don't plan to retire. I'm too young to worry about it. It's never going to happen. So, for some people, it happens to you, where you lose your job, or practice goes under something like that. But it's like anything else. You don't have to have a firm plan. It's also it requires a different thinking about planning. Yeah. And if you're a lawyer, you're thinking about setting a goal and coming up with action items toward that goal. You can do that. That's fine. But you don't have to plan that way for retirement. I have found this isn't a scientific survey, the people I work with basically most of them fall into one of two camps. There is the group that has so many interests, they have so many things they want to do, that they're looking forward to retirement, and the challenge for them is time management.
Yeah.
Right? How do I prioritize? How do I actually make this happen without being even busier than I am today?
Yeah.
The majority group says, what would I ever do? Work is so much a part of my life. It's where I spend most of my time. And it is so demanding. I haven't had time to pursue any interests. When I have pursued other interests, like being on a board or volunteering, it's with business development in mind. So everything has been about my work. And if I stopped, what in the world would I do? And they just have no clue. That's a much harder place to start from.
Yeah.
If when you're young, and the other group that I talk to quite a bit are young people, and I'm talking some of them as young as in their 20s, who see that I'm going to live a long life. There is no financial or other support net, a safety net for me. I can't count on anything else. How in the world am I going to be able to work and live a life that I find fulfilling and support myself, for 80 years? That's pretty daunting. So
Yes.
they start thinking about it in a different way. They think about their lives in a different way. And so it's not planning for retirement, meaning I'm never going to work again. And so how am I, what am I going to do when I wake up every day, so that everything is set out, and routinized. When you're planning for this next stage, if you have specific ideas, you know what you want to do, then you can get into a more structured kind of planning. If not, the ideal thing is to at least start thinking about what's important to me. What would make my life feel fulfilled? Do I have a purpose in life? What are the things I've always wanted to do and never had time to do? What are the things I had to give up because I didn't have time to do them? What have I let go in my life because of work? What new things that I never even imagined might I try if I finally have the time and wherewithal to do it? So if you start at least thinking about that, when the time comes close, then you can start planning in a very different way, and it isn't as stressful. Retirement is enormously stressful. It takes most people many months to get accustomed to it. It's a different status. You're the same person, but the world sees you differently. And, you're not going to be doing the same things. And so when you think about the many possibilities, you don't want to have to sit down after you've left the office for the last time and then start thinking, okay, what am I going to do for the next 20 years? Right? I mean, you want to have some ideas, and that requires at least doing some early thinking about it.
So there's a couple of quick questions in that I wanted to ask you. And based on that, when do you know that it's time to retire? Because that kind of, I guess, starts the backward process, which is the second question, which is, how long would that process typically take, the planning for retirement? So when do you know, and how long would that process take?
Well, for the how long, it always depends.
Yeah.
If you're including in that question client transitions, leadership succession, selling a practice, it depends on, are you in a major firm where you have a lot of support or no support? Are you on your own? Are you a small practice? So, where are you? Where do you want to be? A lot of it depends on that. You always want to give yourself more time than you think it's going to take. For a partner in a large firm with a complex practice that is going to require finding somebody, making sure that they're capable and up to speed, making sure that there's a transition so the client and the firm trusts the successor, all of that, it may take 2 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Just for that transition, and you're planning for your own transition at the same time. For other people, it may not take as long, but certainly if you are a solo or in a small practice and you've got to figure out who's going to be taking over your client relationships, do you have a lease that has to come with it? Do you own a building? Who's going to be the person to take over? You may have to assume that it's going to take longer than you expect. Sometimes it won't. It may take less, but you want to give yourself a cushion. So the timing, sort of depends. But the more time you have, the longer your timeline, the safer you are that you're going to be able to get the things done that need to be done.
Yeah.
As far as when do you know? First of all, I sent you an article. I just wrote an article about this that appeared in an ABA journal, American Bar Association journal, in the January issue, that talks about this. But, sometimes you know it in your gut. Yeah. You don't want to face it, but every morning you wake up and you really don't want to do this anymore. You can't face up to it because what are you going to do if you don't do this? Or you can't afford to quit now. How can you deal with that? But taking a look at why you're still working when your body is telling you, I just really, this does not get the juices flowing anymore. That's a clear signal. And too often we're too busy to pay attention, or we avoid it because it's too uncomfortable. Sometimes it's a spouse telling you, you need to retire. I'm retiring. I want you to retire. Let's talk about when. Sometimes it's the firm giving you signals, or you have one significant client or three of them, and one of them retires because clients retire. So if the business is starting to dry up, you've got a choice. How do I go out and get more business? Do I really want to do that? Or is it time for me to start cutting down? Sometimes, I said earlier, people are retired where they don't expect to be or want to be. But, there are a lot of questions you can ask yourself because it's not the same. I mean, this is such an individual thing. Like I say, I know some people who are thriving in their jobs in their 80s and other people who are ready to go and they are 40 years younger.
But Ida, at the core of that, as I'm listening to you, and I guess, thinking or reflecting a little myself on my own career, it's like, where does that passion or interest lie? And it's almost like when you wake up and your side hustle is getting more excited and passionate than the thing where you're kind of supposed to be for possibly a certain number of hours each day. It seems to me that's at the core of it somehow. Is that right? Is that what you're finding with the folks you're speaking to?
I think that's true with almost everything.
Yeah.
If you actually pay attention to what your body is telling you, if all the little voices in your head are saying, you can't retire, you need to work, you should be working. It's wrong for you not to be working. And this is the only way to work. If those are the voices that are talking to you, you stick it out because that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you can look at that and say, why? What if I could be productive in a different way? What if I could be of service in a different way? What if I could do something more fulfilling that would still, keep me engaged and make me feel like what I was doing was worthwhile? Sometimes, especially right now, we're all operating in such an unusual world. Everything feels surreal and there's no sense really of time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to say, is it the work that is it that I don't want to do the work? Is it that I'm unhappy in this particular job? Is it that I'm just too tired and I need to take a break? Just because your body is saying, I don't want to do this, doesn't mean it's time to just say, okay, goodbye to a full-time law practice. What it may mean is that you want to make a change. some kind of transition into something else without, giving up law practice altogether. I know there's a law firm. There probably are many, but I've spoken to some partners at a law firm that was started by a group of retired law partners. They just wanted to work on their own terms in a different way. They did not want a firm with a structure. So they're basically independent contractors working under an umbrella, and they're working on their own clients. They help each other out when they need to, but it's a new way for them to work, and they have greater control over their schedules, over the kind of work they do. They don't have to worry about meetings. They don't have to worry about, office demands and things like that. The issue of flexibility, flexible work that you mentioned earlier, is changing things for everybody. Suddenly all the people who were naysayers and said, no, a lawyer can't work, remotely, and you can't work strange hours and that kind of thing. Suddenly they're saying, I want to do that too. It's not so bad. Other people hate it.
Yeah, if you change the discussion to outputs and not hours, then the whole thing changes around you, doesn't it? And I think you're right. There's so many more opportunities now, particularly with the talent platforms that are there, but also evolving. And I guess the just people also looking to engage with lawyers in different ways, for limited engagements or longer engagements. It's that opportunity is there. But on that point, and just to pick up a thing, particularly out of your book, you've used the framework for your discussion in many respects about this of design thinking. And I suppose, a lot of folks wouldn't necessarily have connected design thinking with retirement by design, strangely. So how and why have you, landed on that as a framework for your work in this area?
First of all, most people don't know what design thinking is at all. It comes out of product design originally. And it was a new way of approaching how you design a product. And it's not hard to apply this to a career or life planning. It has 5 basic steps. As opposed to a linear goal-setting process, the way most of us professionally have been taught, where you set the goal and you work toward a particular goal, this doesn't start with the endpoint. This starts with the user. And in this case, the user is you, right? I mean, you're the one who's going to be retired. So what would be a great retirement for you? In order to know that, you have to know who you are. So if I were studying what we call this stage empathy, I call it self-empathy, because it's really understanding who you are, how you see the world, how you engage with the world, what's valuable to you in the sense of, your values, not just, it's worth a lot, but what are your values? What are the things you love? What are the things you don't like? What are your skills? What would you like to keep doing? What would you like to stop doing? All of the kinds of things that go into understanding yourself and what might make this next stage worthwhile. Then you start kind of narrowing that down. You look for patterns. You see that your favorite jobs over the years all involved engaging with people. The things you didn't like were sitting in front of the computer all day long and, just parsing terms in a contract. So you start thinking, well, that's interesting. If these are the things I like to do, maybe when I retire, I should look for something that is going to give me this contact with people and less paperwork, less of the highly detailed work. For some people, it may be the opposite. or may not be a factor at all. So you start looking for these patterns. You also start looking at your assumptions, the shoulds, the little gremlin on your shoulder that is telling you the things you should do. And you start questioning why, or the prejudices that surface. Like, most people, I don't want to retire because retirement means you're going to be a really boring person. You won't have anything to contribute. And then you start thinking, well, what about so-and-so? They retired and look at what they're doing. And I think that's so interesting. Or, why do I think that? Because my parents, did that and they were bored for 20 years, but I don't have to be like that. So you start challenging and questioning. And then you start, we call it ideation. It's brainstorming. It's saying, okay, if these things sound good and these things don't, what are some ideas that I can come up with? What are some things I might do that will keep me energized and engaged? And then you start, the stage is called prototyping, but it's basically trying to have the experience. And you test it that way. So you start creating situations where you can actually do the things that sound good. And then you test your real experience against your expectation. And what I like about this process is, first of all, it's not linear. So those of us who don't necessarily want to think in a linear way, and we have to, I did it for so much of my life, I have to really kind of pull myself back. But it comes, for me, it's kind of a natural thing. A lot of lawyers have a hard time thinking about something that is not just not linear, it's iterative. You can keep doing this over and over again. You can do 2 stages at the same time or all of them at the same time. There are fewer rules about how you do this. But the basic idea is that once you start coming to terms with the things that would really be of most interest to you, would keep you engaged physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever creatively, whatever's important, and then trying it out. And the beautiful thing about reaching this point in your life is because the person you're accountable to is no longer the client, the firm, the executive committee, anybody else. It's you. Mm. Now, if you're married or you have a close relationship, people depend on you, you include them. But basically, this is for you to figure out for you. And if you love it and you're happy with what you're doing, you keep doing it. And if it doesn't turn out, if it doesn't meet your expectations or you get bored with it and you don't want to continue, you stop and you go on to something new. So it's a much more creative, adaptable, flexible approach. And, and so to me, I find that a lot easier and more suitable for what's basically an open-ended situation. You've got a long life ahead of you, and you don't have to lock yourself into any particular thing. You can keep trying. You can keep doing the things you enjoy the most and letting go of things that you really don't want to do. So, and that's why I designed the book around those concepts, and why the book is actually a workbook that asks you those questions, because you don't necessarily know all the questions. So it asks you, and people use it individually. They use it in groups, in pairs, where they work individually and then debrief with other people so that they can talk it through and come to terms with it for themselves.
It's also providing, I think, that opportunity for agility and flexibility that is so much and will continue to be a part of, any sort of marketplace where you're working these days, I think, and also obviously very appropriate for the time where we find ourselves right now. The other thing that you urge folks to do, Ida, is to form a personal advisory team. I'm wondering if you could speak a little about what that is and why it's important, because it's kind of a group outside that kind of almost self-empathy, self-awareness that you were speaking about, but obviously with valuable input in the process of working your way through all of this, I imagine. So tell us a little bit about that, if you could.
Sure. I emphasize it for a couple of reasons. One is that one of the most difficult adjustments when people retire is the possible loss, the frequent loss of social connections. You leave work and you assume you're going to stay in touch with a lot of people, but suddenly you're not working, they are. And you don't see them every day. Or the only people you do run into are the other people who are retired, and you really don't want to be just with them. And so you wind up being disconnected. And for a lot of people, this is the hardest part. And without some advanced planning, recognizing you're going to need to make an effort to be connected through social activities, through individual activities, in some way, you need to make sure that you don't fall into isolation, that you aren't spending your time, kind of afraid to get out or reluctant to get out of the house. We all are talking in a different context today. But that you want to, even if it's over Zoom, that you want to be in touch. And we've realized this year more than ever how important it is to have some kind of connection to people.
Yeah.
The reason that you want advisors as well is that there's no reason for you to go through this transition alone. Both the planning and the actual transition into retirement, you need other people to give you reality checks, to give you ideas, especially if you're looking for ideas, to help you deal with some of the challenges that come up. So I would include in a team, it could be your financial advisor. And it's all through the book and everybody I work with. I don't do the financial advising, but you shouldn't be thinking about retirement until you see a financial advisor, so that you have some sense, a better realistic sense of what you're going to be able to do financially. You don't want to go through all this planning and then find out, you don't have enough to cover what you're doing. What I found also is that most people underestimate what they have. Most of the lawyers I know, when they sit down and actually try to figure it out financially, it may not, they may not be rich, but they're going to be okay. And it doesn't matter how much money you have, because everybody worries more than anything else about outliving their savings. And that's true whether you're living, on a retirement pension or whether you got 20 million in the bank. That's what people worry about. So have somebody who can give you a reality check about your financial situation. It might be if you have a lot of health problems, or you live with somebody who has a lot of health problems, or you anticipate that that's going to be it because of family history or something. It may be you want a medical person on that team. You want somebody who's creative, who's a thinker, comes up with great ideas that you wouldn't necessarily think about. Ideally, if you know somebody who's retired and you think they've done a good job, somebody you can talk to about what did they find was helpful, made the process easier. How did they overcome the challenges that they faced? If there are people you trust or people you like, and you just want to talk to people going through the same search that you're going through, the same process, that you can talk with about it. Having people to talk with, first of all, makes it more real. It makes you more grounded. It can help you alleviate anxieties. There are just a lot of ways it can help you. And it gives you one more reason to reach out to people, to talk to them from time to time.
But the depth and breadth of that team that you spoke to, I think, is also an important one to underscore, because as we were saying earlier, I think a lot of folks think retirement equals talk to my financial advisor, but they don't think about all of those other aspects of their lives that they're not focusing on if that's kind of the exclusive touch point. So love that, and just love the fact that you've emphasized that as well. Reluctantly, we have to draw to a conclusion and wrap up. Always sad when I'm chatting with you, Ida, but
I always feel the same way, Terri.
thank you. I wanted to kind of almost come full circle in a way, something we touched on at the beginning, and that was, and we've mentioned it a few times throughout, that we are living in very different circumstances now. They're likely to be with us in one way, shape, or form for a number of years. And so how do you think all of that is impacting, if it is, the way that lawyers and law firms are thinking about retirement today?
Well, I've been trying to find out if anybody has done any surveys or whatever. People, they're looking at young lawyers and what it means for them, and that's understandable.
Sure.
But I haven't found anybody really looking into the impact on senior lawyers, people who are very experienced. But anecdotally, and from what I've been hearing from individuals and from firms, what I'm seeing is that firms are starting to, and they were starting this before, but I think they're starting to recognize that they really need to have something in place to help lawyers when they either when they're thinking about retiring, or when the firm wants to have conversations about the future, how they can raise these issues without being accused of being ageist or wanting to get rid of the old lawyers or that kind of thing. Because most firms that I've talked to are really, they're not malign in their intent. They really do want to be able to plan for the future. And to the extent partners want to stay there longer, it's important for them to have these conversations. But for all the reasons we talked about early on, firms are reluctant to have these, not just because of the fact that the lawyers don't want to talk about it, and that's a huge factor, but firms are reluctant to because they're worried about, for the same reason they didn't like to give women feedback when there weren't very many women in the workplace. What happens if she cries? What happens if she gets angry? What happens if there's hostility? What happens if she accuses me of things? They're worried about the same sorts of things with even more, there wasn't much reason. Here, there is some reason because you're asking people about something that is so important to them, and just raising the question can be really threatening. So I'm working with one firm right now where we are designing training for the partners in management who are going to be having conversations with senior partners about how to raise the questions and how to have the conversations in as constructive a way as possible. Another thing that I think they're finally getting to do, but very, very small steps, I think it's important to normalize discussions about retirement. We can call it something else. We can call it about transitions to another stage, transitions to a different kind of practice or a different career, without associating it just with old lawyers. But something that we think about from the beginning of the career, when firms are doing professional development programs, when they're talking about career development programs or conversations, to talk about what happens, at the other end of the arc, as well as wherever you are now. So that this is something that comes up naturally and it isn't seen as a separate, third rail kind of conversation. And I think those things are important. And I'm starting to see some movement. There's also some firms are bringing in, providing some mentoring or coaching for senior partners. Sometimes it's mentoring through lawyers who have already retired from the firm. So they're using alumni of the firm to serve as mentors. Sometimes it's outside coaches. I don't think this is the sort of thing that an internal coach can address because of the suspicion that we talked about earlier. Even if you promise confidentiality, the partners don't necessarily trust it. And so they don't want to talk to someone in the firm. They want to have conversations that where there's an extra barrier between the firm and them. So there's a little movement. I would not say that this is something I'm seeing, suddenly my phone is ringing off the hook. There is more in the last couple of months than there has been for a while. And I think some of that I assume and expected at the end of the year when compensation decisions are made and everybody's looking at numbers and practices and trying to figure out who's staying, who's leaving, who's going up or down in the partnership. So, I think they're paying attention to it right now. I mean, who knows? I think the key for everybody is, as you said, adaptability, compassion, which is in short supply in a lot of law firms, but some real understanding of how difficult this is for everybody, no matter what their role in the firm or where they are or who they are. This is just a hard time for everybody. And there's so much that we can't predict.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we have to kind of roll with it. And I think firms are doing a pretty decent job with that.
Yeah. And I think, outside the time in which we find ourselves now, I guess the whole question of retirement, to me, in almost a best case scenario, is that it's just another form of departure, just another way that people leave the firm, and each way has slightly different circumstances. Maybe you're moving to another job or you've decided to do a different career. I mean, it's kind of that, but also, I guess, just embedding this strong connection about talent management into your strategy and almost syncing up and connecting the dots between that strategy and your business strategy. Everything has a life cycle, and it's kind of, seeing those things integrated and connected together. We'll hope for that day, Ida. It does exist in some.
Point out something quickly. There's a major difference in this departure. In other departures, people are usually leaving because they're moving on into something else in their career. It's another stage. It's a promotion. It's a new job. There's something really exciting. If you're retiring and leaving the firm because you want to do something else, that's great. Then it will be the same kind of departure. If you're leaving, but you don't, either you're leaving reluctantly or you're leaving and you're not sure and you're afraid and it's, you don't see anything ahead of you, then it can be very, very hard. It's a much more traumatic, can be really traumatic for some people. But, if people do enough planning and they have something to look forward to, then we can have that, yes, one more kind of departure with people smiling and sending everybody off, with a nod and a happy wave.
I'm going to remain focused on that positive thought.
Absolutely. Makes all the difference.
To end us on. And Ida, look, thanks so much for joining us today. And for everyone that will be listening to this session, thank you. And we hope that you've enjoyed it. You'll find Ida, obviously, through her website, Ida Abbott Consulting and in social media. And again, the book that we were speaking about is Retirement by Design. So make sure you check that one out as well. If you'd like to receive updates about the work of CLI and ALPMA, please also be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And as I said, Ida, always reluctantly, on that note, we will close with, again, our thanks for another brilliant session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Terri.